Welcome, everyone, to this parallel session. This is the first of our discussions in that parallel session, which was really looking at digital health and telemedicine. And we're going to start off really by setting the scene and talking about this. This session is entitled A European Vision for Digital Health and Telemedicine. So we'll be going into the European plans, the initiatives that are going on, but also looking at the benefits and what we hope to achieve as a result of those initiatives. So I'm delighted to have with us, joining me in conversation, Roger Taylor, who is advisor to Accenture's Responsible AI program and former chair of the Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation in the UK. Rosa Castro, who is manager of the European Alliance for Responsible R&D and Affordable Medicines at the European Public Health Alliance. Oliver Bleck, area head of Europe South for Roche, and Bartek Madej, who is head of digital for Central and East Europe at Novartis Oncology. So thank you very much for joining us. An illustrious panel. We're going to cover a lot of bases between you. So you've got your work cut out. And I'm going to start with you, Roger, really it's nice to define our terms. And so let's just define what we mean by digital health and telemedicine. And then perhaps you could go on and really just broad brushstrokes. What are the benefits that we can deliver in cancer control, both for the patient and for health systems with digital health and telemedicine?
Sure. And a good question, because we tend to think of healthcare in terms of the patient in the consulting room with the practitioner, or the nurse by the bedside, or the surgeon in the operating theatre. Obviously, pretty important parts of healthcare. But a huge amount of what's going on is essentially just information processing. I mean, crucially, it's diagnosing patients, and diagnosing patients is creating a lot of information, collecting information from the patient, and then using that data to work out which people have similarities, what a diagnosis is, what the correct diagnosis is for that patient, and then, of course, working out what the best treatment is. And again, this is a very, very data-driven exercise. It's driven by huge research programs that test different ways of treating patients and identify which ones have the best effect. And really what is going on with digital medicine and telemedicine is nothing more than trying to take that information processing part of healthcare, about how do you diagnose a patient, how do you identify what a particular illness is. And personalized medicine, we're learning there's what we sometimes think is one illness, maybe many illnesses. Cancer is a case in point. And how do we really know which treatments are working and which treatments work best for which people? These processes, which are really create all the wonders of modern medicine, these processes can be transformed by digital technology. They can be transformed by the collection of data, the use of new techniques, whether it's scanning or wearable devices, the amount of information we can collect to know what is going on with the patient in order to inform diagnosis, that is being transformed. Again, genetics is another area that's transforming that. Then the ability of data processing, particularly AI technologies, to go through vast amounts of data. The data storage capabilities as well are crucial here. The ability to manage vast amounts of data and understand in much greater detail the etiology of diseases and the potential areas of intervention. And then there is, of course, also the delivery. There's perhaps less there in terms of delivery, in terms of the diagnosis and decisions on treatment, but how you treat people and the use of self-care and the use of digital apps to work out how best to intervene with a patient, even as something as simple as remote consultation, all the way through to drones and robotic surgeons. There's really isn't any part of medicine, or very few parts of medicine, apart from those bits I perhaps first mentioned, where digital technology doesn't have the power to completely transform it. And I think we see that very much if we look at the EU's plans. I think the EU's developing some really interesting and strong ideas here as to how we deal with it. And if we look at their sort of three core propositions, they think about it in terms of how can sharing of digital information enable providers of care to know their patients well and make sure they're delivering the right care. How can the use of data inform research and discovery so that we can better identify illnesses and the appropriate treatments? And lastly, how can digital technology empower the individual? What can it do to change the relationship between the the citizen who's often the patient, who's often, as it were, as the word suggests, a very passive participant into healthcare, into somebody who has a greater agency in their own care, greater trust in the system, and as a consequence, better healthcare and better health.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Rosa, a similar question, but collectively, all these initiatives that Roger's alluded to, we have the Beating Cancer Plan, the European Health Data Space, the 1 million plus genomes initiative. What do you see as, do you endorse those initiatives, and also do you see a sort of directionality to them? What do they aim to achieve or what do you hope they will achieve within Europe?
Thank you. And let me start by the last question you asked. So what do we hope? We as representatives of citizens, civil society, so patients, consumers, basically. So we want these initiatives, first of all, something very simple, to talk to each other, to be consistent as much as possible. So we're talking about initiatives that we will be mobilizing a lot of resources, public funding. And so this is very important for the accountability of these, but also for the eventual success of all of them. So let me take just an example for the EU's Beating Cancer Plan and the mission on cancer, which focuses on research. And then the data space, which will be enabling this data sharing between researchers, but also public health authorities, and which is very important and consequential, not only for the patients that will benefit from research, but also for the health systems, for the effectiveness of treatments and interventions for health systems. So it's very important, and we hope that all these initiatives that are being put together right now by different areas, by different sectors, DGs in the European Commission, and then at national level implemented by different ministries, they need to be consistent. So they need to look at these in a synergistic way, avoid duplications, and work and really talk to each other. So in the same way as we hope that systems, technically speaking, will be interoperable, able to talk to each other, we also hope that the people that are designing and implementing all these initiatives will also be talking to each other. I think the second last thing I want to bring now is a holistic view, and this is something we appreciated in the Beating Cancer Plan, which is approaching the question of cancer from all angles, from prevention to treatments and to palliative care, to all the angles of cancer. So we hope all these initiatives in the digital space, but also outside of the digital space, will take this holistic approach. In the end, what we want is, of course, patients and the public to benefit from this. But we also understand that the EU is approaching this from different angles. So from industrial strategy, from the digital single market, and from the healthcare point of view.
Okay, interesting. There's a lot there that I want to come back to: accountability into implementation, and also I think by talking about the industrial strategy as well as the health system, you're actually looking from Europe is looking from a number of angles, which suggests that there must be perceived benefits from all those angles. So that's something maybe we could touch on now is the industrial strategy, and that come to you, Bartek. The question I was going to ask you, and I think it seems particularly relevant given what Rosa said, is why do you see these initiatives as important for industry, and how do you intend to engage with these initiatives, both for the benefit of society, but for the benefit of your businesses as well?
Yeah, thanks, Viv, for having me here and for the chance to participate in this panel conversation. And before going to the deep dive answer, I would like to kind of mention here is that we see across the entire European Union that the patient expectations are evolving. The patients are expecting more than just the medicines and therapies, and they look at the digital transformation, digital health, as ways to help them go through the treatment, go through the whole patient journey and the cancer treatment. And I can share maybe some observations from my personal life. Some members of my family are going through the cancer treatment right now, and I see how much they would love to get more support through the digital technologies, how much they would like to get better access to the information at the right time, better access to the telemedicine as well to enable them to go through the treatment more and more at home than necessarily going to the hospital each time when they need to do particular tests or diagnosis. And I think this is the very important part for the industry as well, is that we want to bring beyond the pill solutions into the hands of the patients. And maybe I can use just a couple of examples that, especially during the whole pandemic situation, the home monitoring solutions were very in need. Patients were really looking for it. They didn't want to be exposed to the risk of the pandemic to go to the hospital on a regular basis. And the technology, the digital technologies enable in many places to accomplish that, and from very simple solutions as ECG monitoring at home using the telemedicine, telehealth, as well. The other area where the digital brought a lot of benefits is in the early diagnosis. So you can there are some solutions available right now in hands of the patient in some countries of the EU, where they can really do the test using the simple application from the mobile phone of their changes of their skin, freckles, skin kind of tumors, and again perform the early diagnosis of melanoma as an example at home. And I think this will be more and more important. And I think the key component for us in the way how we think about digital health is the whole collaboration across the entire healthcare sector. We should all be working in one ecosystem, and that includes the national governments, the patient association, industry, the UC policymakers. Only by working all together, we can really deliver that innovation, the medicines and treatments, but also innovation in the digital space into the hands of the European citizens. And maybe the last point that I would like to mention here is that there are already some movements there who are platforms who are enabled that collaboration. And there is the European-wide movement called Unite. There is the great work being done by the European Cancer Organization within the Digital Health Network, which is gathering together the representation from different industry members, as well as the patient association groups, as well as representation of different other stakeholders in the whole ecosystem. So there are already platforms, and we need to build on that. We need to build on that because the innovation will come only by working all together between all those different stakeholders, which also includes the healthcare startups, academia world. So really the innovation coming from smaller players into the field.
Interesting. It really it puts a slightly different slant on the question I was going to ask you, Oliver, which is I was going to ask you, well, if you want to comment also on industry's role and seeing as you're in industry and how you intend to engage. But also, what I was going to ask was around implementation, and everything that Bartek has said. It's really exciting, but it's also very challenging in terms of it's quite disruptive. I mean, it's quite disruptive to your industry to be in this digital space and to be working on things other than pharmaceuticals. It's disruptive to the health system. I know general practitioners who struggle now because of the online nature and doing things via video call is quite a stretch for those of us who have been classically trained in medicine to do face-to-face consultation. I mean, there's a lot of disruption that the transparency that is brought about by surfacing real-time data on performance and process. That's quite can be quite threatening to providers, etc. So it's really that issue about implementation and the challenges to implementation as well. And they've got these cross-border working amongst sovereign nations and having to sort of go in the same direction, which again can be challenging. So quite a lot to discuss, and I don't expect you to answer all of that, Oliver, but we can have a discussion around that. But maybe you could start with industry and really this implementation part and your sort of top of mind thoughts on that.
Yeah. So first of all, many thanks for having me in this discussion. And I think to your point, Viv, I think it's exciting times as we see, the role that data can play. We saw this in the pandemic. We heard examples from Bartek, how digital technologies can help us. And just as a reminder, as we are very focused, rightly so, on fighting the pandemic, we are also realizing that, cancer patients today may not be served best they can. In some centers, treatment has changed. They cannot see their physician. Treatments are being interrupted. So I think there's many ways where industry, where also healthcare providers just remind on the importance of taking care of cancer patients, and telemedicine, digital technologies just help us maintaining, the treatment to patients and ensuring that patients benefit from it. All the initiatives that we heard from Roger and also Rosa, what she talked about, they're fundamental parts of the European digital strategy, aiming for the vision in Europe to make Europe a role model society that is enabled and empowered by data. And those healthcare initiatives, front and centers, are part of the strategy. And so I really aspire to this vision, and I think it's a very compelling vision for citizens and patients to have a healthcare system that uses data much more. And it involves very many different ways. I think, for one, it's the collaborations with the startup companies. It's those public-private partnerships that we can bring forward and share the knowledge that we have. I just want to highlight, for example, in the US, we have been working with a company that's called Flatiron, which is a leading company in electronic health records. And over time, this company has worked with 280 clinics in oncology. And today, there's millions of patients, cancer patients, in those treatment records. And we could access some of those anonymized data, and this could help us, and did help us, in the research, advancing some of the molecules, avoiding additional clinical trials, but also bring the benefits back to the patients as we had faster reimbursement, quicker approvals. And those insights can also be shared with others. And I know there's about 60 collaborations going on with bio companies, biotech companies, and pharmaceutical companies based on this insight. So I think the vision of having data being accessible, data being shared on a larger scale in Europe, and then have citizens, patients, but also policymakers, and then also research and life science industry work with the data in terms of advancing the healthcare system in Europe, I think that's a great prospect to look at. And I guess, yes, this transformation is a good transformation because it will lead to better care. And by the end of the day, also to much more sustainable healthcare systems in Europe.
Okay, so the prize is big. So I now, maybe I'll return to that question about then the challenges and the accountability for getting us there. I really open it to the floor. Yeah, Roger, go ahead.
Thanks, Viv. I just wanted to pick up on one point. I mean, the potential for telemedicine, digital health, particularly in cancer care, is obviously huge. And given the scale of it, it has been very frustrating for people working in this field that for the last 25, 30 years, we have simply not made the progress we feel we should have made. And the problems around this are very common. They're very similar in whichever country you go to. And they are fundamentally come down to the reality that data and access to data is power. And it's power. You can turn it into controlling people's lives. You can turn it into money. You can do a bunch of stuff. But these changes involve a transfer of power, for example, away from clinicians towards patients or supervisory authorities or managerial systems. It involves dilution of, say, market power of certain organizations who have access to data. It means dilution of sort of the perhaps might bring greater accountability into areas of research and evidence. Now, all of these things are actually beneficial changes. Yep, they are all beneficial changes, but there is always a loser. And the losers tend to fight pretty hard to stop this stuff happening. And so the reason for saying that is just that I do think that what the EU is doing is particularly interesting. And it's this point about bringing different angles to bear, because the ability of health systems to change themselves on their own terms has been very challenging. But I think bringing in the way the EU structured it, particularly thinking about things like, a common market and consumer protection rules as being a fundamental basis for saying, well, the patient is entitled to have an accurate and complete record in a standardized format that could be transferred across a border if the patient wishes this to happen. Provide a sort of a dynamic that I think I think there's stuff there that could change things. And that was one point. And the other point is that it's very hard to change the whole system without trying to change all bits, if you just try and change the research bit without changing the way the health systems work or the patient's relationship to it, you can run into difficulties. And similarly with any other piece. So again, it makes the task harder, but there is an argument for saying, well, we've got to move all of these things if we're going to move any of them to the point where we ultimately want to get to. Thank you.
And so again, question two. Yeah, go ahead, Bartek. Sorry, yes.
I just want to kind of make maybe a couple of comments, looking at the challenges and what just Roger was describing. I think there are two very, very important things that the EU as an institution needs to lead the way, and as well as the country members. So the availability of really high quality, reliable AI solution, digital health solutions, telemedicine, they all depend on the access to the significant amount of high quality representative data. And at the moment we observe that there are at least three very big challenges with the data itself. So we are observing that there is the fragmentation of the data systems as well as the way how we are implementing. So we observe that with the fragmented implementation of Gdpr across the Europe. The second challenge is around the interoperability. So in the meaning of two different digital platforms, data platforms in different countries talking to each other, or even within the one country itself. And of course, there is the challenge with the standardization. So having the common healthcare data records standardized, so we can really use it on the European level. And these are the things that we need to tackle on the European level, but as well as the member state levels. And what EU needs to lead the way to enable acceleration of that digital transformation is to really have a clear alignment between various regulations, because we're observing that there are some question marks between how the medical devices regulations, how the in vitro diagnostics regulation, and for example, how the AI Act, they are fitting together. And I think this is the role where the EU Commission can really play a significant role. Yeah, it's to really setting the clear rules of the game to bring the benefits to the patient as soon as possible.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So Rosa first, and then Oliver.
Yeah, well, thank you. And let me add a little bit to that, to some of the challenges that I think the EU needs to really work on, and that it can have a lot of added value, actually. So one of them, of course, for the patient community is this, that the fact of empowering patients to manage their own data and to be able to access this. But that brings me actually to one of the big challenges there, which is trusting data and trusting digital technologies. And I think there are two big challenges. I mean, the challenge in general of there is a big gap in trust in general in Europe. I mean, there's a recent survey that showed that around a third of Europeans are not willing to share their data, even for public purposes. Their personal data, of course, and health data is a type of very sensitive personal data. But the other big problem related to trust is also the difference between European countries. So we're talking about Europe as if it was a very homogeneous entity, but in reality, what we also witness is big divides between some countries that are very well ahead in their digital systems, even in basic things as internet connectivity. Unless Europe and deals with these gaps, we will really risk of seeing two-tier system in which some countries really have good access and some citizens have good access to these technologies, and the divide and the inequalities between the groups that have access and those that don't have access can be widened. And so that also leads me to just share the experience that we have in IFA. So we are a member coalition. And when we talk about patient groups, for instance, we're talking about a very diverse community. Yes, it's true. I mean, patients in general are very willing to share their data for research purposes and for the public interest. And that has been shown also by many surveys and studies. But it's also true that the patient community is diverse. So we work with groups that are very digital savvy, that have practical experience with digital tools, and some that do not have this. I think that leads us into a bit of hope. So what needs to be done? I don't think there are easy fixes here, but we need very broad investments in digital literacy, again, in overcoming barriers to access, in connectivity to internet, but also in training and education for people. Only if we address this, I think we will be able to overcome this problem of low levels of trust in giving that data to public authorities or to industry or to researchers. And also we'll be able to address this problem of the inequalities and avoid creating new inequalities by introducing new digital technologies.
Mm-hmm. Oliver, I want to bring you in. I just want to clarify one thing from Rosa first, if you don't mind. It's just that very, very interesting points. Do you sense that that's happening in the policy instruments that you see being rolled out at the EU level? Do you see that sort of integrated stepwise strategy to sort of to get everyone on a level playing field in terms of internet connectivity and then digital literacy, all the things you've mentioned, as part to make sure that everything we layer on top is actually on a solid and equitable foundation? Is that in there somewhere in what the EU is doing?
Well, that's interesting. That's what we hope. I think the ambition is there, because Europe has been doing a lot and has been investing also through funds like structural funds that are managed at national level, at regional level, in all these areas for decades. So this is nothing new, of course. The ambition is there. Whether these instruments will be strong enough and I think also ambitious enough to make sure that they address these issues is to be seen. I mean, it's not an easy task, but I think the ambition is there.
Okay, Oliver, thanks for your patience. Let's come to you. Yeah.
No, I think I very much like where you're going, Rosa, and I'd love to build on this. I think by having a society and a healthcare system that's much more empowered on data, one of the big themes that the EU is trying to address is this inequality. What patients actually need in their countries and what science can do. And we know there's a very big difference depending on where you live. And by having access to data, sharing data, one of the big outcomes that we hope to achieve is actually to close this gap. And what I'm hearing, I think, as an overarching strategy, which is really, really important, is the European health data space. To come to this overarching framework where we can have a space that's highly regulated, builds trust, for citizens, patients, but also policymakers to share data and also access data. Then on the level down, if we look into the country situation like Bartek has mentioned, I think we see the fragmentation. We see some countries are doing very good policy work in order to exchange data among countries. But once you leave the border and try to exchange with other European countries, it gets difficult. And so I think the points that Bartek mentioned, there's also another data set out there from the Open Data Institute out of London that just gives you a snapshot where countries are. And it helps to have a different dialogue. So for countries in the Baltics to see how infrastructure, how their work has been perceived and what they could do with other countries in order to, be ready and future-proof once we have the European health data space in place. What can they do from a national level? And then I think it's a very important point, and also as a physician, what Rosa has mentioned, to build trust and listen to the patients, listen to the citizens. What are their concerns? Bring in their perspectives as we make this then a shared data space. Because without creating this trust level, this will only go so far. And I think in that sense, from an industry perspective, it's encouraging to see towards the European health data space to hear this, that country members, specialists, patient groups are addressing all these topics around quality, interoperability of data, infrastructure, but also data rights. And also have scientists at the table, data scientists from industry, being part of that discussion to help create this common data space that we all strive towards.
Great. Okay, Roger. Just before you come, So I was just going to shout out to we actually have a bunch of sessions on the data, the sort of fuel that's going to drive digital health and telemedicine. We've got those coming up. So it's great to introduce that topic. Thank you, because I think that's critical, getting all of that right for actually developing the applications and ensuring those applications are safe and effective, which is another topic I want to get onto is around that. But Roger, did you have something to comment on the basis of what Oliver's just said?
Yes, but perhaps also to your point, Viv, which was I think the points about, for example, digital literacy, connectivity, potential inequalities rising. These are really important points, but there's also can be a problem with a barrier to moving forward in these situations, which is the problem gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and we're trying to come up with a general solution across the whole field, and it just becomes unmanageable. There's too many pieces that need to fall into place before anything moves forward. And I do think there's a lot, and I think it's interesting, how the EU can engage on this level, but there's a huge amount to be gained from just taking very specific circumstances and building systems that work. So take a specific group of patients, perhaps a particular cancer, and put in place, systems that do deliver on empowerment and citizens' rights, that they have, trying to establish levels of entitlement to levels of monitoring, including monitoring in the home, if people wish to have that. The ability to understand how data is being collected and how it's being used. The ability, I think, crucially, a hugely empowering thing for lots of people is the ability to partake in research and to sort of volunteer to be involved in trials. I think the way that Genomics England has found a way to sort of work with people who allow their genetic profile to be used in research as part of an ongoing mechanism, which will then come back to them if there are any further developments or discoveries that would be relevant to them. Putting these things into place, I think, in particular instances, will, I think, often help move us forward rather more quickly, and is worth doing, even if we can't guarantee we can make it work for everybody right now. We just I think need to show people, because it goes to this trust point. I think one of the problems we've had is often a desire to just tell people that it's going to be great and therefore they should trust us. And while that's definitely worth doing, and obviously getting the governance right is crucial, the thing that wins hearts and minds faster than anything is just experiencing a better quality of care, feeling things actually happening in your life or the lives of people in your family. So I do think it's difficult when we're talking at such a high level about the principles that should underpin these kind of operations. But I think making it happen on the ground is going to move us forward very quickly.
That's interesting you say that, Roger, because earlier in the conference I had an interview with Tim Spector, who's the lead for the Zoe COVID study, which has got an app which has been downloaded by millions of people here in the UK, certainly. And anyone who hasn't seen that, please, I think it's probably available on demand if you haven't seen that. He describes exactly this, that because it was useful to people during COVID, they were downloading it and they're very happy to submit their data. Because they realize it's helpful to them and it's helpful to others, and it's when you get to the particular that you actually get those gains. So that's very interesting. Does anyone have any other comments on this topic? Because I have a specific question around this, actually, around these sorts of applications. But I'm just opening it to comments before I ask that. Okay, so I was going to ask. So if we think of these applications, the COVID thing being an example, but we're talking about cancer here. These sorts of applications that enable people to engage with their health and engage with say, teleconsultation or whatever, like any therapeutic application, they have potential for benefit and potential for harm and potential for inequity as well. So how do we ensure that if we are going to have these types of therapeutics, these digital applications that are helping with decision making, whoever's making the decisions, that they're effective, safe, high value to the health system, and equitably distributed in the same way as we might talk about making sure that's the case with drugs or devices? Bartek.
Yeah, thank you, Viv. I think the answer to that is most important in the collaboration between all the different stakeholders. That's the key to success. Like I was mentioning before, we start seeing these platforms around Europe where we are bringing different stakeholders together to really kind of make it happen and implement the solutions which are safe, which are reliable, which bring the trust to hands of our patients. And we've seen it a couple of great examples already. So the digital COVID certificate, of course, is the most visible right now. There is another initiative that the European Commission just announced around the European Cancer Patient Digital Center. It's really another step towards getting a very trustful solution into the hands of the patients. And we as an industry are also committed to deploy all of those different digital solutions, artificial intelligence in a very ethical way. And I think that's the critical component to here, to collaborate across different partners and making sure that we bring that innovation to the healthcare systems. And I think maybe if I may, I just would like to call it out a couple of lessons that we've seen from the whole COVID pandemic situation, which accelerated the digital transformation significantly. I think there are three lessons that I would like to call it out. And the first one is around the EU should take health in all policies approach. I think we've seen it through the pandemic that the health and wealth are deeply connected at the national and the EU level, and we should continue that collaboration after the pandemic as well. The lesson number two is all about the healthcare system depending on the innovation. And this is, again, innovation in digital space is extremely important. So having all different stakeholders at the table, continuing that innovation will be key to the success, key to the improving the patient care moving forward. And the last but not least is, of course, more generic, that we need to harness the power of digital and data. So we are calling out throughout the conversation various examples. And I think we need to continue really pushing that forward on the standardization of the national electronic health records, which are enabling a lot of solutions cross-country level across the EU, but as well kind of bringing the very tangible applications to the hands of the citizen and really enable them to use them in a trustful way. Because I think we call it out a couple of times, the e-health literacy, the citizen voice. And before being the patients, we are all citizens. And why citizens are not having a stronger voice in the donation of the data, with the embracing of the e-health, in the embracing the health records sharing. I believe that we need to get stronger on that, and we need to really empower the citizen voice and improve that e-health literacy.
Thank you. Yes, Rosa, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, if I may add to that, to Bartek's points, because these are very important, of course, for us as organizations representing patients and people and civil society. I think it's very important to bring the word meaningful engagement. So yes, engagement with stakeholders is, everyone agrees that patients should be involved, especially in the design of digital technologies. One practical problem is how and when do you engage with them? Meaningful engagement doesn't mean that you bring the patients at the end to test some technology that is almost ready to go, but it's really about engaging with them, understanding the needs. And that comes back to the main justification of digital technologies, which I think has been mentioned also by Roger and others. Technologies are there to support procedures that have been there for centuries in the clinical practice in other areas. So technologies are there to make people's life easier. The end users, be there healthcare professionals, patients, consumers, or public health authorities. It shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be patients and people trying to adjust to technologies, but it should be technologies trying to adapt to their needs. And so I think that's a key concept that will help in overcoming some of the barriers. But also I wanted to bring another point, which is about, a lot of these initiatives have a great ambition of creating a space within Europe, facilitating the life of patients, citizens in Europe. But what about the international collaboration? I think that's a big also lesson that has come from the COVID-19. Very broad and very successful collaboration in research gave the fruits that we have right now, new vaccines in a record time. And so it's important also to bring this question, because it's not only a question for researchers and for industry, but it's eventually for patients and citizens. we need to also overcome barriers into the exchange of data, into the collaborations outside of the EU. And there, of course, we have a great framework, a pioneer framework in the world, the Gdpr, the General Data Protection Regulation, which has been copied and is a model around the world. It isn't perfect. It has a lot of issues with the implementation, but it's the main instrument that was there, setting the pace for others to go and protect data, personal data, right? But it has problems, especially and specifically with the sharing of data outside of the European Economic Area. And those need to be also overcome to ensure that the cancer research, which sometimes really needs to be population-based, especially for some rare cancers, is not delayed or obstacles.
Thank you. So we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. Oliver, if you want to brief, because I just want to introduce the last topic that we really have time for. But Oliver, do you have a brief comment on what Rosa said? Or?
I actually have two very brief comments. So one,
okay,
I very much like where Roger is going in terms of making the work very transparent and visible. And if you may, start small and then just illustrate the example where you work together and build trust, whether this out of a specific patient group or a specific disease area. And then building from that on, I think, this can expand. And I think to Rosa's point, let's just appreciate in Europe overall, in terms of cancer research, if we don't, move on in terms of data sharing and make data more available and accessible, we may be falling behind even further between the research that we have in the United States or in Asia in some parts. So I think that's a real call for Europe to get ahead, to bring the strength that we have in life science together. And then also be this trusted voice, I believe. A lot of people trust Europe for its strong regulations and be a credible voice in this moving forward. So I think there's a good reason to really focus on these efforts now moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So now in the last few minutes remaining, I still want to press on this issue of effectiveness, safety, and value, and equity. So we have to think of let's say it's a clinical decision support tool that helps me as an oncologist make a decision to prescribe something, or it's a self-care tool that helps me as a patient to navigate my treatment and my care. That could be done well. It could be done badly, and we could be as collaborators, as you said, we work with everyone, but it still could be delivering the wrong recommendations that are harming people, just like a medicine or something else we do in healthcare can be, or it may not be getting to people who really need it. So I still, I'm not sure that collaboration or even allowing the market to operate and work with patients to develop it will necessarily guarantee safety, efficacy, good value to the health system, and equity. So I just want to finish on that point. It seems like quite a big challenge, and we don't have much time. But Roger, go ahead.
No, I think you're exactly right, and obviously that is the dream of the future: is you have a health data space that allows you both to, if you're going to trial something and produce evidence of its efficacy, it's not done in a sort of you do it privately over here and then you share your data. You do it in a collaborative environment where the data itself links into broadly available, not publicly available, but data that can be made available to other people, that it's open to contest at the level of the individual data items, and that different interpretations are possible. And you can then also see distribution across the population, who's getting it, who's not. That is the dream. Yep. The problem we have is getting from where we are now to that dream you're talking about. And so I do just want to come back and just say, the thing that keeps happening, because all the things you're talking about there, Viv, are things about the power of the system as a whole. These, ensuring that it's safe, ensuring that it's delivered equitably. These are things about government or regulatory responsibilities. And what we keep getting spooked by is the fact that these systems keep seeming to be another effort to sort of concentrate power in the hands of governments or sort of large corporations. And I think the way out of this is to be really explicit that we are going to build systems that are there to empower patients and doctors. They will also do what you just said. Yeah. But my sense is if we keep coming at it from this angle of we're going to build a system that's fantastic, yes, individuals become mistrustful and think, yeah, but you're not building it for me. It's extraordinary in the UK that when we polled people, most people do not think they personally benefit from government sharing data. They think it helps somebody else. They think it helps a civil servant, but they do not think it helps them. And that's, I think, the barrier we need to overcome.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to give you all about 30 seconds, if you'd like it, to make any last sort of closing remarks. 30 seconds each, but don't feel you have to take it. It's just we would like to close up the session in a couple of minutes. So let's go to put your hand up if you have anything to kind of close up with, to kind of takeaways for this. Yes, Bartek.
Yeah, definitely a couple of points, Viv. So patients empowerment, extremely important. Fully agree. The collaboration across the entire ecosystem, creating the one healthcare ecosystem, European healthcare ecosystem of the future, powered by digital and data, extremely important. And maybe one point that we haven't had time to touch today is that if it's not measured, it's not managed. So we need to measure. We need to put the very strong key performance indicators, measurements in place to really measure the progress towards that future, like Roger was describing.
Okay, great. Anyone want to add anything? Otherwise, I will close up now because we're a little bit over time. Otherwise, I think that's a good way to end. Okay, Oliver, go ahead.
So for me, I think what I'm hearing in our discussion, what we are dreaming for, is that citizens in Europe have rapid, equitable, sustainable access to healthcare innovation. And for the reasons to have a better life for European citizens, longer lives with regards to cancer. And I think data will be a key foundation for this moving forward. So I think if we have this bold vision, I'm pretty sure we can make it work towards the various angles that we have looked at the problem. But let's not lose that big vision and the dream.
Okay, great. Now that is a perfect way to end. So we'll leave it there. The next session is all about specific examples of digital applications. So it's great we've had this discussion, and we're now getting into the very specific. So thank you very much indeed, Roger, Bartek, Oliver, Rosa. Thank you very much.